Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. In this episode, we explore a critical issue that affects schools everywhere, student attendance, and how it shapes the success of our educational systems. Our guest is Ted Franzen, retired superintendent of the Pembina Trails in Manitoba. Ted brings a wealth of knowledge and experience, offering insights into the importance of teacher-student relationships, strategies to support families in need, and why addressing the root causes of absenteeism requires creativity and innovation.
This week's podcast is brought to you by the word innovation. Innovations in Neuroscience offers insight into how schools can use brain-based teaching strategies to incorporate movement to stimulate brain activity. These innovations in science can lead to more student movement and improved student outcomes.
At the end of this episode, be sure to visit our website, www.restorative.ca, where you can find some great ideas to address student attendance from a restorative relational perspective. If you enjoy this episode, be sure to subscribe on Spotify or YouTube. Shelley's away this week, so let's head over to this discussion with Steve and me, Stan. Welcome, Ted, to our podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you here. And what we wanted to ask you about was, what have been the best practices that you've observed when it comes to dealing with student attendance and student absenteeism?
In my view, the best practice is having engaged teachers. It's about the adult practice, quite frankly. Having teachers who value the relationship with students and observing teachers who value that relationship with their students. And out of that relationship, and of course, a robust program, an academic program of studies that appeals to students through the relationship. So sort of the carrot, if you will, that students want to come to school. And a story that immediately comes to mind was early in my teaching career. Our school that I was in, our high school, had a late policy that if you came to class more than 5 minutes after the bell, you were marked late. And if you collected too many lates, you would have a detention at the end of the day. And I remember during a discussion with my principal saying that this didn't seem to be a very effective way of reinforcing punctuality, if we valued punctuality. And my principal said something very wise to me that I've never forgotten, and this was almost 40 years ago. He said, Ted, the most important consequence of being late to your class should be having been late to your class. Make the opening of the class so worthwhile that your students are rushing through the halls safely to get to your class on time. And I've never forgotten that little bit of wisdom from the principal who hired me. And so teacher engagement is clearly one of the most important elements of it. And then, of course, having follow-up. So if a student has missed, it's important to follow up with that student. Sorry that you weren't here yesterday. You missed some work. Do you have any questions about it? Are you able to collect information or parts from the lesson from a classmate? And if it's a repeated absence, then the follow-up includes contacting parents. So it's that engagement with the student, it's the engagement with the parents. It's really at a human level, showing that we care and that we value the kids being in our class. I'm not just going through the motions as a teacher. And I want my students to see that, and I want the parents of my students to see that I'm not just going through the motions, that I truly want those kids present.
It reminds me of a story of a high school French teacher in Ontario who had the opportunity to teach grade 9 French to kids who didn't really want to be there, but who needed a French credit to graduate. And what she did was she just made sure that she had a talking circle every single day in her class. And if she would miss the talking circle, the students would say, Miss, we didn't have our talking circle today, because they came because of the connection that they developed with her through the talking circle. Now, the talking circle was in English, but her attendance was phenomenal because they got to know her, she got to know them, and it was that relationship. And you know what? She actually taught them some French along the way too.
Since attendance is dwindling all around North America, not just in Canada, and everyone's struggling with attendance, is it because enough teachers aren't doing that? Or are there other reasons that you'd want to point out to? What are the other reasons that you think, other than the relationship piece between teachers and students?
There's no question that the relationship piece between teachers and students is a critical factor, but as you say, Stephen, it is not nearly the only factor.
Yeah.
I think there's been a shift in society generally about the value of uninterrupted learning and the value of a continuous attendance in school. So I think back to my own experience as a child, to miss school would have been your own funeral or a funeral of a close relative. You simply did not miss school. When my wife and I raised our kids, we would have never have dreamt of taking a family vacation during school time. Family vacations, that's where we had winter break, that's where we had spring break, that's where we had a summer. There was lots of time outside the school year to have, and that has shifted. So my own kids, whom I love dearly, and my grandkids, whom I love even more dearly than my kids, they will take vacations during school time. Cheaper flights, better flexibility at the other end in the south or wherever they're going, and for some sun and sand. There's been a shift in focus, and it's not just in my family. You can see it across North America that family trips, those who have those means, are eating into class time like never before. Certainly, we have more mental health issues amongst family members and poverty. And so in my role as a superintendent, when I would be involved in decision making about how do we get more kids to school, we would do a walking school bus as an example of something that we tried. Or we would actually add bus routes into the communities that have a lower socioeconomic background. We would add a bus route, even though they didn't qualify for transportation. We would make an exception. And in both of those examples that I'm thinking of, the walking school bus and the actual tin that drove around, the issue was we couldn't get the parent to bring the child to the curb to get on the bus if we had the bus, or to join the walking school bus. And the reason for parents not being able to bring themselves to doing that had to do with also mental health, poverty, and possibly just not appreciating the value of education as much as we once did as a society.
Now, the things that you mentioned, engaging parents, mental health, poverty, not appreciating education, that one might be something within our scope as schools, but we didn't go into education to be mental health workers, to be poverty relievers, or to help people find jobs or housing. I would just add a couple of other things. So what are schools to do about all these things that are outside of the scope of what schools were designed to do?
Oh, what a loaded question. As you were rattling off your list, Stan, there were a few more that came to mind. Daycare never used to be part of our responsibility either. Frankly, school buses, getting kids to school wasn't our responsibility. That responsibility came later, to actually go into the kid's home and to bring a kid to school. But school buses are a relatively new phenomenon in education, and certainly you're right. Schools are not designed and intended, at least not initially, but more and more, the schools have taken on those responsibilities, like transportation, like daycare.
I think that looking at where you can have the greatest impact is really important. And so here's a hypothetical. You've never had somebody drop a money bomb in your lap as a superintendent at all. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that when you were at Pembina Trails, because now you can speak to this hypothetically, right? You had a money bomb of $500,000 given to you to use to alleviate problems around student attendance. Where would you put it to have the greatest impact?
The first thing I would do is acknowledge that creativity and innovation almost never happens at the center.
Hmm.
It happens at the edges. And so the first thing I would do is I would reach out to the principals. I had the stats, of course, about attendance, so I would do a research on my attendance stats across the district. And then I would reach out to the principals of the schools that have the poorest attendance record and match them up with principals that have the best attendance records and have a meeting with them and find out where could we put this money for the greatest impact, and ask them what have they tried, and would some of these new dollars help them double up and triple up in what they've tried. And the schools that have had really good attendance, there's some ideas there, and they don't need the money because it's working, but maybe the other schools are smaller and haven't had the money to beef up those supports. So I'm not going to answer it directly because I don't know the answer.
I love what you've said, though. I really do, because first of all, you said you have to be creative on the edges.
Yeah,
You're starting with some data, you're engaging people in conversation, giving them voice, but you're not saying, here's 50,000 for your school,
right.
do something with attendance.
Thank you for those kind comments. Data is extremely important. People can spin a web without data. People in the classroom, they are the people that know. I trust the people that have been put into positions of principal, who are closer to kids, and then the teachers with whom they talk. You have to do that. You need the data, you need the money, you need the trust, you need the relationships, you need the consultation. One of the things that I was known for was that money follows a good idea. And how do you know it's a good idea? You need Hattie, you need experience. Hattie's the research. Now, what's actually worked in your school, in your classroom, and let's replicate it.
The comment that I was going to make is that what you're describing sounds absolutely awesome, to put that trust in the classroom, when it seems to me that across the country, less and less trust is being put in the classroom, and teachers are feeling less and less empowered to really take a risk or to try something new for fear of making a mistake or fear of reprimand. And so I'll just do whatever's safe. Somebody in the school board that I worked in said, in terms of leadership in the school board, duck and wear beige. And that's how she survived as a principal, which is, it's hilarious,
It
but
is,
it's
but it's sad.
sad. It is so sad, right?
Yeah.
So how do we encourage that risk taking around innovation in the classroom for attendance?
That starts at the top. So another quick story. We in Pembina Trails, and we have 9 trustees, and I will never forget an occasion when we as senior admin, we screwed up. We made a mistake, and not just once, but this one was big enough to come to the attention of the board. And there were a few trustees who wanted to pile on, and then one got the attention of the chair and said, in this school division, we name the mistake and then we move on. We don't need to keep coming back to this. It's done. They'll deal with it. And the others listened. That was a powerful message from the very top. And I'm not saying for a minute it was perfect. I'm sure that there are teachers in Pembina Trails who, if they watch this podcast, would say, I didn't feel empowered. But I would like to think that most of them will say, and continue to say, that they felt trusted by their principal, and that they could be innovative.
Mhm.
And they felt supported, not just trusted, supported. Huge importance to have both.
Yeah, to have support as opposed to just permission.
Yes.
You need both. And
Yeah.
I think one of the things that attracted me about restorative practices was that when things do go off the rails, when things don't go right, that we've got a way of repairing the harm and getting you back into community, or getting you back on track, or dealing with the mistake that's been made. But it's a very conscious and intentional way of engaging all the voices of the people that have been impacted by the decision,
Yeah.
and then moving on from there.
Schools are changing rapidly. at least in Pembina Trails, which used to be by and large a fairly to do, mostly Anglo-Saxon, and with immigration, that it's been almost an overnight transformation. So if you were to go to some of our larger high schools, you would find over 50 languages spoken in the halls, over 50. One of our high schools of about 1,200 kids at the time, there were over 50% of the kids attending that school were not born in Canada. The diversity of our schools has changed remarkably. And so for me as a superintendent, director of education, who has not come through that kind of system, for me to pretend to know what's going on in schools from firsthand is just not being authentic, and it's not being honest, not being fair to the teachers who are living that change. With over half the kids being EAL, English as an additional language, it's a very different challenge for those teachers than I had.
I was going to ask about the CBC article about attendance across Canada, and if someone were to consult with you, Ted, about what needs to happen across Canada, what would be your best advice in terms of addressing student attendance as a Canadian issue?
Boy, if I knew the answer to that, I'd write a book. I have spoken with folks, colleagues, friends across Canada in the last 4 weeks on this matter of attendance out of curiosity through my past relationships at ERDI, Education, Research, Development, and Innovation. And to a person across this country, there is a growing concern and acknowledgement that we have a serious problem when it comes to attendance in school. You name the jurisdiction, they said it. They're not pointing fingers at anyone. It's complicated. There are no simple solutions. Complex problems rarely have a simple solution. One of the things that I heard over and over again was that we don't actually know how bad it is. And that came through in the CBC article. So the first thing that we need to do probably is to actually know what the problem is, how serious it is, and where the problem is. I think we can probably all think of examples of where we thought something was true until we actually looked at the data and we discovered that we were way off. So if you've ever read Hans Rosling's book, Factfulness, if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. And if you have read it, you will know of what I speak when I say that Dr. Rosling made a very compelling argument that most of us haven't got a clue of what's actually going on in terms of literacy scores around the world, literacy, height of education, how well people are doing. The gap between boys and girls is not nearly as bad as we are led to believe by reading the media and listening to the media. Rosling's point was that the media distorts these things, knowingly or unknowingly, and we fall prey to that. And so we need real data. And the article in the CBC made a case that we don't have it. So the first step, Stan, my long way around back to your question, is let's get the data. Let's find out how bad it is.
What's holding us back?
I think there's this shame and blame. So I'll give you a quick example. A few years ago, the Winnipeg Free Press sent an email around to there are 6 school districts in Winnipeg. Don't ask why, but there are. Mm-hmm. And they sent an email to each one of us, of the superintendents, asking if we would share our suspension data with them, our out of school, in school, expulsion. And people were a bit nervous about doing that. But we are required by law to give reports to the board. We usually do it in camera. So the board has the data, and rightly, trustees should have that data without student names, of course. And how many suspensions per school and the reasons. So we agreed that we shared the data. It didn't take long. We were all comparing each other, right? And one of my colleagues used to speak quite glowingly and with a bit of pride about how low their suspension rate was. And they didn't suspend easily in that school district. And there was a lot of rhetoric that turned out to be, I have to be respectful here, turned out to be inaccurate. So I was quite pleased that my school division had a lower suspension rate than that particular school district's was. So the tendency to compare is human nature, I think. That's partially why we don't have the data. Another reason is that we don't have a central student information system in many provinces. Some provinces do, but not all, not nearly all. And attendance is tricky. Let's say you're a student in high school. There are 5 periods in a day. You're taking 5 credits. You missed 1. You were there for 4. You missed 1. What are you, absent or are you present? You're in middle years, and now that school takes attendance half days. You're there in the morning. You're not there in the afternoon. Are you present or absent?
Mhm.
You're on a field trip. Are you present, or is it a school approved absence? Your family says you're going to Pakistan for 3. I only choose that because in my community, that's a very common thing, to go back to India or Pakistan for 2 months to spend time in the spring with your family. Wonderful purpose, but you're out of school for 2 months in Canada. So what does that mean? Does that skew the data?
Yeah, it's very difficult to collect. The thing is, we have the data somewhere. Everybody's got the data because attendance is taken every day.
Yes.
Good, bad, or indifferent, and how they categorize it and score it, and what codes they put next to it. It's there. It's how do we pull all that to make one cohesive report? And you're right. As a principal, I always argued that because my attendance data for my school, I was in high need schools and flourishing schools. I was in the whole range of them, and every school was different. And I would argue the attendance data every year that you stop recording it because we had this unbalanced day. 2/3 of the day was in the morning, and then we'd have lunch. The last third was at the end. But if a kid was absent in the morning, they're absent for half a day. If they're absent in the afternoon, they're absent for half a day. But it was really 2/3 and 1/3. And so we argued it till we were blue in the face. Finally, I just gave up. But you're right. There's so many different ways that each jurisdiction collects the data that it's an apples and oranges thing. So until we can almost create a unified system, the data is going to be somewhat different. But that doesn't mean you can't collect it within your own district. Each district has their way. Collect your own district data. It's there. It's all there. It's just a matter of whether we want to publish it or not. And Stan and I were talking to somebody earlier on a different podcast who said, you know what, we're almost afraid to publish it because now people start looking at us a little funny that we're under fire for not doing our job. How come you haven't got those kids in school? What aren't you doing? As though it's all the school's fault that 22% of our kids are 10 days absent or more, when we know that there's so many other variables that are beyond our control. It is a tough thing, but you're right. Let's get the data and let's go from there. So we have to make it publicly known.
So in my conversations with friends and colleagues across Canada, one of the ideas that's come up is an incentive program for having kids in school. So if you happen to be a person who is on social assistance and struggling to get your kids to school, there's a bonus for you. If your kids are in school 80% of the time, then there's a bonus in the monthly stipend. That's one idea that came up in my conversation with friends and colleagues. And what if we paid the school districts a bonus to get the chronic absentee kids back into school? Watch them then.
This has been a great conversation. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today, Ted.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
One of the most effective practices to address student absenteeism is through engaged teachers who build strong relationships with their students. Beyond teacher-student relationships, societal shifts are contributing to declining attendance rates. Changes in family attitudes towards education, the increased occurrence of family vacations during school time, mental health issues, and poverty are some of the broader issues and factors leading to higher rates of absenteeism. Find out more about our work with restorative practices and addressing student absenteeism from a relational perspective at www.restorative.ca. Email me, stan@restorative.ca. And as Ted Franzen points out, effective solutions require creativity, innovation, and community engagement. So let's get creative, innovative, and engaging.